Hello there, this is a video for the benefit of anybody else out there who is suffering from all the symptoms of sinus cancer, like I have been since 1994. Now, I would like to say straight away off the bat here that I have never had a formal diagnosis of sinus cancer at the doctor's surgery, and this is following a very serious misinterpretation of my symptoms at the ENT specialist way back in 1994. Not just one ENT specialist, but three different ENT specialists that failed to recognise full-blown symptoms of sinus cancer when they were presented to them back in 1994 at Bournemouth Hospital. And this basically forced me to fend on for myself, forced me to battle cancer on my own and find solutions to this illness or suffer the consequences, basically, and had no other result than hanging me out to dry. And I'd like to say at this point that I'm not in any competition against people who have received a formal diagnosis from the doctor. I'm not here to try and argue whether you had an easier or worse route out of a serious problem than I had. All I'm here to do is remind you that I have been through extreme suffering regarding this illness, extreme torture, extreme misery, and in the meantime I have used the symptoms or used the time to try and gather as much information as possible to alleviate the suffering, reverse symptoms, and put myself onto a path of better health, basically. And this, as I say, has come only through great suffering and through extremely prolonged torture is the only way I can describe it. And has made me very keen, really, or very aware of the fact that there are many serious issues afoot here. Other people who could clearly be tortured by this illness, other people who have received botched diagnosis or misinterpretations of their symptoms and put into the same boat as me. So this video is for your benefit, and try, with the hope that actually it can avoid all the suffering and 25 years of misery that I was put through, in order to find some just quite simple tricks to help to reverse the symptoms. Now, I'd like to say that there is no guarantee, the 100% guarantee that the little tricks I've learned, which I'm going to expose in another video, are 100% effective cures. Just saying that they will increase your chances of survival and probability of establishing better health. Now, as I say, I was right. I've been in no doubt right from the beginning in 1994 that I have had sinus cancer, quite simply because of the severity and seriousness of the symptoms, which were extreme and unique. I, as I say, was in absolutely no doubt that I was suffering from a very dangerous terminal illness. But what I did not know is that it was cancer, quite simply because I was misdiagnosed, misunderstood, misinterpreted. I was kept in the dark about the nature of the illness I was struggling against, and was basically left to struggle with sinus cancer on my own with very severe symptoms for the best part of 17 years, until I finally discovered one day on my laptop, as I'm trawling through a Cancer Research UK website, all my symptoms listed in black and white very clearly, in a nice long list, matching exactly with mine on the paranasal sinus cancer page. So you can imagine my surprise and mixed feelings when I suddenly realised that I was not the mad person that I'd been told I was, that I had been struggling with there was actually finally an explanation for these awful symptoms I've been struggling with. And of course, everything that's happened since 2011 has only confirmed that every detail of this discovery was correct and is correct and has stood the test of time. Here we are 8 years later, and as I say, there's not been one piece of information to challenge the fact that that self-diagnosis at home was 100% correct. And as I say, time has only reinforced the truth of that discovery. Now, add to this the fact that I have been quite badly mutilated, I guess, through this misdiagnosis, this neglect at the GP, by the fact that I've been hung out to dry and left to battle these symptoms on my own, as I say, has resulted in mutilations. This is to my teeth and marrow, losing over half my teeth. This is as a consequence of the loose teeth symptom, and a change in the shape of my face, I believe, due to the pressure exacted on my head by the tumour, has squashed my face into a slightly different shape, resulting in a mild change of identity, if you can call that mild. I just call it a change of identity, maybe. And it could even be described as a loss of identity, which is all amounts to basically significant, undeniable proof that yes, I have been battling sinus cancer. None of this is made up. It's all entirely genuine. And as I say, I didn't need these mutilations at the beginning in 1994 to remind me that I was battling cancer. I mean, all this is basically just compounded and compiled on top of all the original evidence and suffering that I was forced to endure. Now, point being that the symptoms that I struggled with and was forced to struggle with since 1994 basically steered me toward things that help to alleviate my suffering. This is only through great misery and great torture that I was forced to endure over extended periods of time. I basically, had no choice but to, given that I was hung out to dry by the doctors, forced to just get a little notebook and make a list of anything that helped to reduce the severity of my symptoms, even by the minutest degree, as well as make a list of things that antagonize the symptoms by the minutest degree. So in time, diligently, I formed a collection of information that could help to improve my circumstances, alleviate my suffering, and reverse the symptoms of sinus cancer. Now, I set upon this task and was obviously tackling, as I say, cancer and organising, assembling a little list of cures, even right at the beginning, without even knowing that I had, for 16 years, without even knowing I was battling cancer. So, as extraordinary as this is, it does suggest, basically, straight away here that there has been a loss of information. In other words, as my list of cures assembled or started to grow, list of ways of alleviating symptoms grew, I was able to sit back and look at this list and realise that, hang on a minute, this could very easily or quite clearly has been discovered in the past by numerous other people. And very clearly this information has been lost. I'm just somebody who has rediscovered basically something that's ancient. And if we add to this the fact that sinus cancer is clearly an ancient disease simply by definition, and that we are as a species now beginning to discover actually the true length of our time on the planet that we have inhabited the planet here on Earth for. And I'm referring to recent discoveries regarding like a hip bone, this is from Africa, that have shown very clearly that our ancestors that we evolved directly from were walking around upright 5.8 million years ago. Now, this blows the situation wide open to suggest quite clearly that we have been treating sinus cancer for 5.8 million years. And if you add to that, examples now of cities that we were building, quite sophisticated cities, this is 50,000 years ago, much earlier than we first assumed. We now are building a picture of treating sinus cancer for at least 50,000 years in situations of, very well sophisticated built cities, with running, flushing toilets and all this sort of stuff. But yet still 50,000 years later, here we are in 2019, and we have no knowledge about how to treat this illness at all. And we have another piece of evidence here, of course, in that these 3 different ENT specialists that tried to diagnose me in 1994, 25 years ago, were basically struggling, or more evidence of the fact that specialists do not know how to not just diagnose this disease, not just but 3 specialists have no clue in diagnosing full-blown symptoms of sinus cancer in 1994 when I presented with them, and even less of a clue about how to treat it. And that, I believe, is further evidence of the fact. I mean, not just to, I mean, add to the fact that, as I say, that I could already see even before I realised that, that the cures were quite clearly ancient. I mean, everything points toward the fact that we have lost vast amounts, or points toward the fact that we have 5.8 million years of experience treating this disease. We should be experts by now. We have, quite clearly should have, millions of years of hard-won expertise. And the fact that we, a person like myself has been misdiagnosed by specialists 3 times in this so-called modern era of technology is very indicative and a very strong indication of the fact that we have lost cures in the past. We have lost vital knowledge in the past. And what I'm trying to say to you is that this loss has not been accidental. Very sadly, it has quite clearly been deliberate. And I say that because, very worryingly, I discovered that there is a huge amount of money that can be made through losing information about how to treat sinus cancer. In other words, there's far more money to be made out of not knowing how to treat sinus cancer than there is knowing how to treat it. And that may also translate into not knowing how to diagnose it. In other words, there's a lot more money to be made in not knowing how to diagnose it than there is knowing how to diagnose it, as well as how to treat it, which does clearly suggest that we did know how to reverse and treat. We knew how to diagnose this illness 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. There were people about that had gathered information to reverse the symptoms, but those people unfortunately provided a rather unfortunate obstacle to people who saw business money-making opportunities. And I'm referring to the opportunity now to assassinate and execute anybody, or subject them to campaigns of terror like I have been. And this touches on another subject now, which is the fact that there has been a campaign of terror, isolation and blackmail imposed upon me since 2014 by my father, Dr. Edward Galizia. This is since I managed to assemble an effective little collection of ways to reverse the illness. All of a sudden, my father, a retired doctor, slams this campaign of blackmail and terror upon me to try and silence me, which again is a huge indication that he's terrified about me releasing this information, and terrified about the fact that this could jeopardize a huge industry. And the industry that I'm referring to, of course, is the fact that we have assassinated anybody with cures in the past. We routinely executed anybody who had information about how to diagnose and treat the disease early on and put a patient onto a path of recovery. Quite simply, from the most basic reason of all, which is anybody who's suffering from the symptoms. And nobody knows this more clearly than me. This person who was left on their knees, crying, begging out for help like I was, in a situation of extreme misery. As I say, nobody knows this more clearly than I do, how fast a person kept in that form of torture, kept in that state of misery, will hand over their money. And I was literally handing over cash, doing whatever I could to, in the hope that I could alleviate my symptoms by the smallest degree, which is, of course, what anyone will do when they are trapped in that corner, terrorized with the symptoms of sinus cancer. Basically, they are the easiest person to make money from in the whole world. And you can keep them there virtually indefinitely, just paying out their money, emptying their pockets on a daily basis in the hope that one day somebody will provide them with some information that will help. And this is a double whammy here, because the same people that are assassinating the people with cures are the same people that are setting up these cancer research charities, the same people that basically assassinated people, in the past who had cures and effective ways of reversing symptoms, are the same people who set up research charities to try and look for a cure. So in other words, to say that they could now keep the victims of sinus cancer on their knees, literally begging for help like this in a most state of most extreme misery, handing over their money. And as soon as their face started to bulge out into all these different shapes as a result of this torture they were being, being subjected to, then there's another massive business opportunity here, because of course the people that run the cancer research campaigns or charities can then pick up all these mutilated people and use them as puppets and instruments to collect more money for their campaign. And of course, the more mutilated they are, the more horrific their facial distortions, the easier it is to make money. And the more of them there are, the easier it is to make money. And it's quite clearly one of the biggest scams on the planet, not just the most ancient. And the sensitive sort of nature of this issue you cannot underestimate, because what I'm getting to here, as some of you might be able to tell by now, is that we crucified the cures to sinus cancer. We crucified the effective treatments to sinus cancer 2,000 years ago. In other words, all these stories in the Bible about Jesus being able to cure stubborn, dangerous terminal illnesses were all entirely true. And the fact, that nobody else could manage to reverse these symptoms, and people would tread high and low, hills and valleys to look for a cure and not be able to find them, is all completely true. In other words, to say that the treatment that I've suffered, quite curiously, falls into an ancient category. The very fact that my ENT specialist, 3 different ENT specialists, failed to diagnose me correctly, basically meant that by default I fell into an ancient category, meaning that we have to wake up to a bigger picture here, that sinus cancer treatment for the vast majority of our time on the planet has not been accompanied by a formal diagnosis. We've not had a doctor's surgery sitting on every street corner for the past 5.8 million years, or the past 300,000 years even. It's a very, very, very new thing. So for 99.999% of the time we've been treating sinus cancer, nobody was diagnosed. We all had to fend for ourselves, which basically meant that as soon as a person started to get symptoms, they would start tugging on other family members, their husband, wife, spouse, friends, whoever, to go and find a cure for them. And the worse the symptoms were, and of course the patient themselves would just have to literally set off on foot. There was no Google, there was no trains, there was no cars. Be able to set off on foot or donkey or horseback and find a cure. And of course, in 99% of cases or whatever, people would come back empty-handed, because it's a very, very, very rare illness. And there's more money to be made, of course, from destroying, cures than there is by keeping, or looking after this information.